You don't know their names yet, but you will.
Wow. You know what? We spoke, we had a good show with Bob Azumi, and we touched base on a few things. And our next guest actually had a long-term relationship with Bob Azumi in one of his endeavors over the years. And he's a personal friend of mine. We love having him at the Spring Fishing and Boat Show. And I think Bob probably said it the best. He's like an encyclopedia of anything fishing, right? And he said he was the one that named him the doctor. So I'm going to introduce him as the Doc of Fishing, ladies and gentlemen, Gord Pyzer, right here.
How you
You
doing,
know,
man?
how you doing, buddy? I think is his voice okay, Victoria? Are we a little bit too far back? You were fine. Okay, just checking your voice, make sure you're good.
Okay. I can
You
pick
know,
up what
it sounds like a little bit low. You sure it's good? She's saying you're good. You're good.
you
Gord, over the years, I've always had a great deal of respect for you. You've actually come down and fished some of our tournaments over the years. I've altered some of my tournaments based on some of your story, your stuff that you've noted on. All right, and because it's important that I listen. So I want to pick your brain. Where did it all start for you? Like, where did you start when you were before this whole fishing tournament? What was your original life? Where did it start for you?
most folks won't believe this, Andy, but I grew up in downtown Toronto. Grew up on Avenue Road and the bottom of the Avenue Road hill. I went to elementary school, Avenue Road in St. Clair. But my dad fished. My dad actually, in the Second World War, he was a wireless air gunner navigator in the Second World War. Flew up over the English Channel in out of England during the Battle of Britain, and flew Lancaster bombers. Actually had his ears perforated, blew out his ears coming back over the English Channel. And my dad loved to fish, and we were really working class family. So my dad used to drive up. My mom and dad would drive up to Rice Lake and rent a boat, an old wooden Peterborough, and my brother and I'd be with them, and throw out a bobber in the old days. And then the next thing they did is they bought a cottage up in the Halliburtons, and that was just incredible. But I can remember, I don't think I was 5 years old. Grew up on McPherson Avenue, and I can remember heavy rainstorms, and I honestly would sit on the curb with a little tiny homemade piece of stick and a piece of line and a pin, and honestly expect to catch fish in the curb as the water drifted down the curb in downtown Toronto. But
I,
that love for fishing led to me, when I got a little bit older, went to university. So I went to the University of Guelph, and I did a master's degree in resource management. And as luck would have it, I got on working with the Ministry of Natural Resource, and that just, I traveled Ontario. I did my master's thesis in Algonquin Park. I've worked in North Bay. I've worked on Lake Nipissing, the North Bay area. Uh, Lake Simcoe was always it's my second favorite lake in the world. Lake of the Woods is my favorite, and Lake Simcoe's my second favorite. But working for M&R took me all across the province. And the other interesting thing, uh, for one short spell, I was the policy advisor for the Assistant Deputy Minister of Natural Resources.
oh
And
wow.
that was out of Peterborough. And Peterborough, for not Peterborough, Thunder Bay, was the hotbed. That was all of our research for for walleye, the Savannah Lake Research Station. So I met up with folks like Dr. Peter Colby, and Pete he literally wrote the biology synthesis of walleye for the United Nations. And another great friend was Dr. John Castleman, and everyone knows John is probably the world's foremost authority on muskies.
Yeah.
And I've just you and I were chatting before this started, and I mentioned to you, I've lived a charmed life. Grew up during the renaissance of fishing. Became really good friends with Alan, Ron Lindner, Doug Stange, Bob, and Wayne. Wayne was my tournament partner for 20 years, Wayne Azumi. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget, when I first started writing for Outdoor Canada, I was, 22, 24 years old.
Is
And
that
I
where
got,
it all started?
pardon me?
Is that the beginning of it at 22, would you think? Was that where it all hooked you into the manufacturers and all the tackle? And so
And
22 years old.
22, 23. And Andy, this is really interesting. I got a phone call, and it was from the Toronto Sportsman Show at the time, and they said, and I was in Thunder Bay at the time. I'd moved already by then to Thunder Bay, and I was working for the assistant deputy minister. And they said, "Would you come down and do seminars at the Toronto Sportsman Show?" So anyway, I said, "Yeah." And I'll tell you how they said, we can't afford to pay. We can afford your expenses, but you got to come down for free. The best we can do is we'll make a donation to a charity of your choice. And I was associated with the Big Brothers organization.
Yeah.
At the time. I had a little brother. And so I said, okay, you make a donation to the Big Brother Association, I'll come down. So anyway, flew to Toronto, and it was behind the scenes. And I was just getting ready to go up on stage. And this is the honest truth. It was the first seminar I had ever done in my life. So I was mid 20s, late 20s, maybe even early 30s by then. And this other guy who was in the warm-up area, he came up to me and he said, "Listen, I got to do a seminar right after yours." I think I was on at 2:00, and this guy came up and he said, "Listen, I got a seminar at 3. Why don't I come up and do one with you at 2, and you stay up and do one with me at 3?" And I said, "Oh, sure, that sounds great. We'll just feed off each other." And that was the first time I ever met Bob Azumi. And from that day, we have been best of friends.
Wow. We just had Bob on, and I'll tell you, he's one of those guys that I've always looked up to, even though he's shorter than me. But he's I had to throw that in there. But
Well, I don't think he's watching right now. I'd say I remember when he had hair.
yeah. I think I remember that too. So it's like, but he actually had mentioned that you guys did a radio show together. How many years did that go for?
Andy, we were nationally syndicated for 32 years.
Wow.
And many years, we were 3.5 million listeners a day. We did 100, I wrote 120 radio scripts for 32 years in a row. And Bob and I, some days we'd be in the studio, and I saw part of the show. I had to leave for a little bit, and as Bob was saying, everybody thinks this is easy. And I mean, we were in the studio some days till 1:00, 2:00 in the morning. And you got to get it down on radio back then. You had to get it down to the second. And we'd have to, they'd go, "No, you got to do it again. You got to do it." We'd go 2, 3, 4 takes trying to take a second or 2 seconds off. And poor old Bob, and I know he mentioned this when he was talking, he'd stumble over a couple of words. And Andy, I have never laughed so hard in my life. People used to say to me 2 things. They used to think Bob was my brother. And I'd go, "My brother?" Bob and I are brothers. But then they say, "What is Bob really like?" And this is the truth. The guy you see on television, the guy you see on the street, the guy you talk to at the sports show, the nicest guy you have ever met in your life, that is Bob Azumi. The guy you see is the guy you get.
Yeah, he is very real, and you know what? He's real, but he's also a human being, right? And that's just the reality of it. And I think sometimes things. He must have his days and days he doesn't. And listening to him talk, and not to make this a Bob show, but you don't realize how much he carries on his shoulder when you're talking about it's the networks, it's the sponsors, it's the fans, it's he has to, and you know what, those guys have never produced something that was not of good quality, and it was all, and you know what, it's like you said, when you're reshooting something because you're trying to get it on the second, how many times? And the thing is it's over and over and it's repetitive, but at the end, the product is perfect, right? And that's all that really matters, right? But people don't see how you get to that perfection, right? So
Oh, it
it
is
is what it is.
so difficult. I mean, um, I I suppose the fact that it looks easy afterwards, that's a sign you did such a good job. And so, you watch Bob's television show and it looks, you go, oh my God, I can do that. Well, no one's stopping you. Go do it. I'll tell you a little secret, Andy, and people don't realize this as well. We then started doing seminar series right across the country. We were touring and doing seminars at sports shows, Mid Canada Boat Show, the Toronto Sportsman Show. I can remember one time we were doing it. It was the Toronto Sportsman Show, and it was a huge stage, and I guarantee there was over 1,000 people crammed in the Coliseum then, and we were
Mhm.
on this big stage, and they had scaffolding, the big scaffolding spectators. So there's 1,000 people in front of us. And we're talking, and we always had rods and reels in our hands. And Bob's flipping into a bucket over in the corner, and I'm making a couple casts over here and whatever. And I can always remember somebody asked a question about bait casters and how you thumb it and how you cast it just the right way. And Bob said, "Gentlemen, up in the top step up." So it was like 20 stairs, ramps up. There's literally 1,000 plus people in front of us. And he said, "The gentleman up there wearing the red hat, stand up, please." And the guy got up, and Bob said, "Take your hat off if you don't mind." The guy took his hat off. Bob said, "Hold it in front of you." And then he said, "Now open your legs up, stand apart with your legs spread." And Andy, he made about 5 casts, and every single cast over the entire audience went over the guy's shoulder. He had a plastic casting plug on over his shoulder, under the guy's feet, and dropped inside his cast or inside his hat. And you go, to this day, I have not, I have fished with Kevin Van Dam, Ricky Clun, Aaron Martins was just a dear friend. I spent a week in California with Aaron and his mom, and I have never seen anyone cast. You don't think Bob Azumi is the best largemouth flipper and pitcher in the world? He is the best in the world.
I wouldn't take that away from him. You know what? I'm surprised he didn't skip it off somebody's head. I'm joking. But
Like
you
I
know,
was on social media today and had written something he probably would have.
I'll tell you, like he definitely has a huge following, and I've watched it on his social media. I've watched it over the past 24 hours. The amount of people that have reached out to him on a personal note, and it seems like a lot of these people actually know him personally. I should have asked them, like, how many people do you think you know personally, because he knows the whole country. So, but you've done really good for yourself too. Like you've done great on both sides of the border, because you've done a lot of work within fishermen. And how'd you hook up within fishermen? Like, how did you manage to get involved within fishermen?
Yeah, that's an interesting story too. Is a lot of folks don't realize I actually helped start the Kenora Bass International Tournament, and which is the largest bass tournament in Canada today. Uh, Folks can't, other than the Bassmaster Classic, I don't think there's a more attended tournament in North America than the Kenora Bass International. Anyway, make a long story short, the three fellas and their good friends Steve Green and Doug Bishop and John Buchanan, I was the district manager here in Kenora at the time, and they came to the office and they said, we're going to start up a walleye tournament, a walleye masters tournament on Lake of the Woods. And I said, guys, from an M&R perspective, we will fight you every step of the way. We don't need another walleye tournament on Lake of the Woods. We were about 25% over sustainability harvest. And Lake of the Woods, all from a walleye perspective, is always being massively harvested. And I said, but listen, if you switch it to bass, we will work with you every step of the way. And they go, bass? Nobody fishes for bass. And I said, listen, you fish for bass, and I will help you out. We'll help publicize it, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, make a long story short, I started to pull some contacts together. Wayne and I became the consulting pros for KBI for the first 20 years. And then we put some calls in. I put some calls into Al Lindner, Ron Lindner. Al and Jimmy were coming up. Terry Baxay from the Bassmasters was a good friend. O.T. Fears, Bassmaster Classic winner. So we would have 8, 9, 10 Bassmaster Classic winners fishing the Kenora Bass International. That's how competitive this event is now. Anyway, Al came up, Al and Ron. And I'll tell you the other thing, Al is unquestionably the best freshwater angler the world has ever seen. We can talk more about that later. But anyway, Al came up and he was fishing the tournament with Jimmy, and Ron would come up and he'd fish with Billy. And then Al and I were chatting, we'd go out for dinner, and he said, you got to start writing for us now. You can't just write in Canada for Outdoor Canada. You got to start writing in the States. So, Al went back and he met up with Doug Stange, and I started writing for them. I was writing for Fishing Facts in the U.S. at the time. I was going full bore for Fishing Facts, and Al actually started his career writing for Fishing Facts too. And then he started up in Fisherman. So I made the switch over to In Fisherman, and then, eventually co-hosted the In Fisherman Ice Guide television series with Doug. And I've been a field editor within Fisherman for probably 30 years now. But it was the relationship with Al, who simply is the greatest freshwater angler the world has ever seen.
I know, because I've talked to Al quite a few times back in the days with all the Lund meetings we used to always go to and stuff. And he always, once he said, I said this to Jeremy, I said, I remember Al saying to me, because he knew I used to run the bass tournaments, and he goes, because I used to always talk about walleye, and he go, I'm a pretty good bass angler. he goes, I can hold my own out there, right? So, and but he's made it with the walleye. Back then it was a different following. People they were consuming the fish, and they wanted to know how to catch these fish. And he's always been like, and I think that you fit perfect with both those groups, whether it's Outdoor Canada or within Fisherman. It's so specific. That's what I love about you, because I always call you the encyclopedia, but it's because you never ever not give you. I don't walk away thinking, well, something didn't make sense. You know what I mean? Because you clarify everything, which is amazing. So just because you're talking about KBI, I just want to so where did Gussie must obviously you must remember Gussie starting. I think that was his first major tournament, right? Or no?
Oh, absolutely. No, it was first major.
Yeah.
When I first came to Kenora in '76, when I first came here in 1976, we have a junior A hockey team, the Kenora Thistles at that time. And the star of the Thistles hockey team, the junior A team, was Jimmy Gustafson. And anyway, so Jimmy got drafted into the majors. And I believe he played with Indianapolis in the Central Hockey League.
Wow.
And anyway, make a long story short, Jimmy didn't quite make it up to the NHL. He came back, back to Kenora. And he and Peggy's his childhood sweetheart, and they were married, and they lived just down the street. So, make a long story short, again, my daughter, she was about 13 years old at the time. She became the babysitter for the Gustafsons. And Jeffy was the firstborn, and then Ben, and then Katie. And so this is what's so neat is when Jeffy was about 7 years old, 8 years old, it might have been 10. His mom, Peggy, she wanted him to learn how to play the piano. And Jeffy's going to kill me for saying this. So his mom called my daughter, who's a phenomenal piano player, and she was giving lessons at the time. And she said, "Would you teach Jeffy how to play the piano?" So Jeff starts coming to the house. He'd come over, this little tiny kid wearing glasses, and he was a little thin guy, and he'd knock at the door, and he'd come for his half-hour piano lesson once a week. And he was about 10 years old, let's say, and he'd come at 4:30, and then he'd stay for dinner, and he'd say, "Mr. Pyzer, can we go down and look at your tackle?" And literally, there were many days he would stay until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and we'd rummage through my tackle. And in the rec room, I had this huge aquarium. I mean, a really big aquarium. It was about 8, 10 feet long, 4 feet wide, 4 feet high. I had smallmouth bass in it, walleye, small northern pike, crappies. And every time we'd come home from fishing, we'd throw our minnows in and they'd eat them. And it looked just like the bottom of Lake of the Woods. So, again, make a long story short, when Jeffy was about 11 years old, 12, I said, "Come on, Jeff, let's go fishing." And from the time he was about 8 or 9 until he went to university, we fished many of the major tournaments here together. He was my part. We fished the Shoal Lake Bass. Our last 4 years, we were fourth 4 years in a row. And this was and I'll never forget this. He had just gone to university. So he just graduated high school and gone to university. And that was September. The Shoal Lake Classic on Lake of the Woods here is always September 20th weekend. And anyway, my phone rang about the 12th or 13th of September, and it was Jeffy, and he was almost in tears. And he said, "My mom won't let me come home. I've just come to university." He was at Thunder Bay at the time. He said, she won't let me come home for the tournament this weekend. And I said, "Don't worry about it, Jeffy." And we'd been fourth 4 years in a row. And so I got another partner who had never fished bass, and that was the year I won it. But Jeffy and he's fished with me since. I've got photos of him in a Snoopy life jacket when he was about 8 years old, 10 years old. We'd go walleye fishing, Andy, and he'd never let me net the walleyes. He'd always say, "Oh, no, I got to boat flip them." And he got this big Snoopy life jacket on, and he's flipping walleyes into the boat. And I always called him Roland after Roland Martin, because he wouldn't let me net the fish. And he has developed, I'll tell you another quick little secret here. He's developed in one of the best bass anglers on the planet. And part of the reason we'd go bass or walleye fishing, and he'd bring his little plastic lure box, and he'd hop in my boat, and I actually had a Ranger back then, Ranger bass boat, and we'd take off. We'd go walleye fishing. He'd have his little plastic lure container, and he's got a Snoopy jacket on, life jacket. And if he had 50 lures in that tackle box, and we were fishing for walleye, it could be spinner baits, lipless crankbaits, whatever. When we came home that night, he had every 50 lures in that tackle box had got wet, and he had used them. And that's when you learn the versatility. That's when you learn, things don't always work out the way. And I can always remember we used to fish a spring tournament here, and he was about 12 or 13 years old. And we had done pretty well. We'd almost won it. And then in the summer, he said to me, next year, this is what I need to do. And I said, Jeffy, next year, you don't know what the weather conditions are going to be like. You don't know what the lake's going to be like. You can't plan next year in the middle of this year's summer. But Andy, he's grown into one of the best anglers Canada's ever produced. Yeah. And here's the key. He's like Bob. He is a solid citizen, the nicest guy you ever want to meet. Never says bad things about anyone, never posts crap on social media. He is the nicest guy you would ever want to meet, and he's the guy you want your daughter to marry.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. He really is. And actually, I talked to him last week because we were talking about the Ultimate Ice Fishing Show, and I can we say it that you're going to be there? Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Are you excited? And it sounds like you're really excited about it. And Gussie's going to be there. We're working on other speakers, but right now, you're going to be hopefully the first one on tank. But you got a surprise because you're bringing your grandson, right?
I am. And that's my grandson, Liam. He's 20 years old now. And he reminds me so much of Jeff. And this, again, is the honest truth. When my grandson was about 11 months old, 10 months old, whenever you can first start to stand, he would stand on my lap in diapers, put his hands on the steering wheel. And that's when there was never a point in time since he was 1 year old that he hasn't been driving the boat when we go fishing. He was driving a boat before he could stand and walk. He would just put his legs on my legs, hold the steering wheel. I'd put my hands over top of his, and we'd go. And Andy, he's landed over 30-pound lake trout through the ice. He's landed over 40-pound Lakers in open water. He's caught more big muskies. Wow. He's caught more big muskies by the age of 20 than I had caught at the age of 50 or 60.
Wow. Well, he's got some pretty good mentoring. I have to admit, the mentoring is pretty good. But like talking about your grandson, talking about you, talking about Jeffy, and Bob Izumi, obviously, and everybody really. There's a lot of guys up there. You work on other shows. You also work with Angelo on his show, right? It just seems like we got a really good group of Canadian anglers, or ambassadors, are probably the best way to say it, that I'm pretty proud of.
We, for a whole bunch of reasons, about some of them are good science reasons, just the way our climate is, the way our lake's set up, the fact we've got 2/5 of all the fresh water on Earth. But Canadian anglers are the best anglers in the world. We are exposed to things most American and that's not being pejorative or trying to say anything nasty about American anglers. But they don't know what cold fronts are. They don't know what fishing in cold weather's like. They'll get 32 degrees and they'll go, oh my God, it's cold. Well, come on up to Lake of the Woods in November when it's 12 below or 15 below Celsius and it hasn't quite iced up yet, and try fishing up here for cold front bass. But the fact that guys like Jeffy and Bob have experienced those sorts of things, the world is starting to see the best anglers for bass, walleye, muskies are right here in Canada.
So, muskie, when did you so it sounded like you were a pretty balanced angler growing up, like probably more bass than anything else, like bass, maybe walleye, but now you've become like in the muskie world, because Muskie Sunday, which is Muskie Sunday at the fishing show, is huge. Like, we've had to empty that room out and reload it up because the fire department was overwhelmed with how many people we had in there. But the thing is like, but even the Muskie Odyssey, like you do so much with Muskies Canada, and very well respected in that whole muskie world. And it seems like you're hands on this elusive fish. So like, when did that start for you? Like, how did that kick off for you?
You're not going to believe this, but my aunt and uncle had a cottage on Lake Skugog, and I might have been I might have been 5 years old, 6 years old. And we thought that was going up north from Toronto. I mean, they come folks in Port Perry. My wife grew up in Blackstock, but folks in Port Perry commute to Toronto now. We thought we were going up north. But when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my aunt and uncle had a cottage right across from Port Perry on the island, just south of Caesarea. And I'll always remember we have the big K-Pock life jackets. And I was about 5 and my brother was 7. And my dad said, okay, you guys can take out the boat, but you can only row out. You can't go. And like we were maybe 100 yards out, 200 yards out in the lake. And I was intrigued by muskies when I was 5 years old. So I'm casting away. And my theory back then, I even had theories back then, was if I dropped a bait and I was casting a crankbait, if I cast to the exact same spot on the weed line, I would tick off a muskie, get him so mad that he would come running out and eat my bait. And lo and behold, a muskie came out and I was 5 years old. I was fishing with a steel rod, a steel bait caster. This was in the mid 50s, I guess. And I had black nylon line on an old bait casting reel. And anyway, I got this muskie on and he's fighting me and I'm fighting him. And I can always remember, I looked on shore and my dad came running out of the cabin and he's running down onto the dock and he's yelling, let out line, let out line. And I'm going, is he crazy? I'm not letting this fish go. And I hung on Andy and the muskie dove. And as he dove down, he snapped my metal rod, and it literally was steel. He snapped the rod in half, went under the boat, and I'm now holding on to half a rod and a bait casting reel and black line, and the muskie came up the other side, and it honestly cleared the front of the boat on the other side and snapped me off. Wow. And I had tears running down my eyes, and I thought, my dad's going to kill me. I broke the rod and reel, and he was on shore laughing. But that was 5 years old, and I got hooked on muskies when I was 5. And 55 years later or 45 years later, I passed the first modern muskie management regulations for Lake of the Woods here. We modernized the fish regs. We were the first ones to put modern muskie management regs on Lake of the Woods. And I was fortunate enough growing up when I was up here on Lake of the Woods. Remember the Molson Big Fish contest?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, they used to print 1 million applications a year, and you could pick them up at the beer store. And over the entire course of the year, you could enter your catch.
I did.
And I think it was 5 years in a row, I released the biggest muskie in Ontario. Oh. And 5 years in a row, I released the biggest northern pike as well. And every one of those northerns I caught by accident fishing for muskies.
Wow. Yeah, I did a speckled trout. My cousin was bigger than mine, but we put speckled trout in that Molson's Big Fish. That was like back in the day. That was a big thing for us. I don't know, like I wonder how many other people. I'm sure people are watching this remember that Molson's Big Fish. That was a big thing. It was cool.
Oh, I think it was the biggest fishing contest in North America at the time, and I know for a fact they printed over 1 million applications a year.
Wow. And it was for all fish. It wasn't just for. It was like it had every category of fish, and it was good. Yeah, no, we really maybe we should bring that back, Victoria. Talk to Molson and see if they want to get on board, and we'll get Gord on side too with it. Oh, you're not allowed to enter any fish; you'll be banned. Gord. It's just there's so many things like you think about the history of just fishing in general in this province and in this country that have just evolved and like even Bob's show, like he's getting into the TikTok thing. Who would ever thought that? You know what I mean? So, but not just that, like I'm sure it'll be filled with all the social media stuff. And you've done a lot of stuff social media now too. I think it's the way that everybody's kind of leaning towards that way. But to me, I when I look at guys like you, and I think of guys like Bob, and even Ange, and everybody else that have so much years of experience, I think it's nice to know where it's coming from. It wasn't just because you had a really good digital program to make it look good. You know what I mean? So and I'm not knocking the guys that do, because there's a lot of good guys out there doing. I appreciate the YouTubers and all stuff that do like the product reviews and stuff like that before you come. I totally respect that part of it, because like sometimes especially in today's, you're buying online a lot of times because it's just not available like it used to be, right? So, but there's a lot of things happening in this world, and hopefully we get back to where we want to be a year from now, right? And I don't know, is the Muskie Odyssey happening this year? I don't even know.
It is.
It is.
I actually think it's relatively soon.
Yeah.
Um,
No, so yeah, so people might want to check out Muskies Canada. We're a strong supporter of Muskies Canada. They're a great organization. They've got some really good leadership. I believe there's 700 members in that deal, right? So and they've got some pretty good projects. The Simcoe project, for instance, they also were instrumental in Georgian Bay, all right? So I think they're doing a really good job with everything they do. And Muskie Sunday will be back in 2023, I promise you. So the ice fishing show, let's talk about that for a little bit, because we're pretty excited about that, to be honest with you. And you're related with Normark, and you've done a lot of work with Normark over there. They had a tank that we now have, right? That they were using at the shows a few years back, and it's a pretty big show. So we're fairly sized tank, not like the mega tank per se, but and we were actually going to be building a tank for it. So we ended up it worked out fine for us. So now we've taken this tank. Obviously, we're going to have to tear it apart and then rebuild it. But the glass is there. It'll be molded into a trailer. The whole idea is putting a platform over top for two people, maybe a grandfather and a grandson. There'll be two holes. Yeah, we're gonna have two holes in it. It'll look like 6 inches of ice. Meanwhile, it'll be steel, so you don't have to worry about melting or cracking. And the tank will be there. And the whole idea is to be able to do presentations and be able to show. Not everybody's going to get up on top of it, but the tank's part of it, right? But it shows that we're doing this for long term. We're doing this for long term. So
and I think, Andy, ice fishing is probably the fastest growing sport right now within fishing. It's the fastest growing segment, I think, of the fishing market. I think part of that is because it lagged behind. And now with technology, ice rods. I mean, most of us grew up with wooden rods, and now, boy, there's graphite. When you see single action reels, when you see, I mean, the innovations in the last 5 to 10 years on ice fishing, I think is the fastest growing within the fishing market. But the other thing, I do have to say this about your shows, and it's really, really important, whether it's Muskie Sunday, Bass Monday, the Ultimate Ice Fishing Show. If I have I wouldn't say it's a problem with social media. What social media tends for me to focus on a bit too much is simply entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's fun watching somebody catch a lot of fish, but if you don't learn anything from it, it leaves me wanting a lot more. Like what reels are you using? What rods are you using? What depth are you catching the fish at? What are the weather conditions like? What adjustments have you made? And that's where the Ultimate Ice Fishing Show, and that's what Muskie Sunday for me has done. When I participate on Muskie Sunday, the questions we get asked, the biology, how muskies interact with other species. There's so much social media nonsense from a biological. Guys will say, they're not eating today. Well, the reality is fish are always eating. They can't afford not to. A walleye in the middle of summer is eating 5% of its body weight every day. And if you're not catching them, you're not fishing where the fish are. And that's where your shows, Andy, that's where they really highlight that high education. And I would encourage anyone, if you want to learn in 3, 4 days or one day, if you want to learn more than you could learn watching internet or social media for almost a lifetime, come down to the Ultimate Ice Fishing Show and listen to what the folks are saying. And more importantly, ask questions and come back. Liam and I'll tell you right now, we have a lake trout technique. I have a crappie technique. We have two techniques, a lake trout and a crappie, that are unbelievable. I have not written about them. I have not talked about it. It's just something that's kind of the new research is where I'd like to put my emphasis on these days. I was out a week ago on what everyone was saying was a tough crappie bite, and I limited out in 45 minutes. I caught one on my first drop 5 days in a row. And but here's the more important thing. I struck out more days than most winter ice crappie fishermen have ever spent. So it was those strikeout days. It was the days catching nothing, but zeroing in on the biology of the fish, what they're doing, what they're eating, how they behave. And Liam and I have a lake trout technique that is unbelievable. It is simply unbelievable.
And hopefully we'll pick that out of you at the Ultimate Strike Fishing Show.
We'll skirt around the edges of it.
You know, but it's true. Like our like with my show over the years, we don't think I think we're we are the least inexpensive of that level shows out there. But like, we've never really promoted our show as a discount warehouse sale area. We've always promoted as an opportunity to learn, and the money that comes in really helps us, cover the costs, because like hotels and everything costs money, and bringing in like the qualified people. That's what this whole show is about. This whole weekend's about, is showing how qualified the speakers are at the spring fishing show. So, and we lean on the manufacturers obviously, because that's a big part of our show, because most people aren't attributed to go down to ICAST and see the new product, and unfortunately a lot of tackle stores cater to their customers and what their customers are fishing for. So if they're more of a bass-based store, they're going to bring in the bass-based stuff, so you might not see the muskie part of their lures, right? So we then lean on you guys to show the best of those lures that work for those species of fish, and then the manufacturers, hopefully they have them in their displays so people can see, and we're knowing that that's going to come back again a year from now at the spring fishing show, and at the Ultimate Ice Fishing Show. Like, we're hoping to create that exact same, complete show of information where guys can come and they could learn how to get out there and number one, be safe, and number two, be still controversial. You have to be conscientious of your environment. Always, you should be, right? And at the same time, you release things that shouldn't be. So, but all I can say is I'm looking forward to it.
Here's the again. I have a piece I worked out with Jeffy. It's coming out very shortly in Fisherman Magazine. Now, everyone knows Jeff won on the Tennessee River last year with the technique we developed up here called moping. Now, Jeffy calls it moping. I call it hovering. A lot of other guys call it hanging. But it's in Northwest Ontario. Actually, Jimmy Lindner is the originator, but we've been doing it up here for 20 years. Jeffy won the tournament on the Tennessee River last year doing it. But as Jeff will tell you, I have done it every single tournament. I've thought about it and tried it, and it's never worked. And that's where your show's so good, because it has the Jeff Gustafsons of the world, the Bob Azumis, saying, listen, guys, there is no such thing as the magical bait. But if you want to mope, if you want to hang a bait over the side of the boat, I will tell you the right conditions. It won't work 90% of the time, but I'll tell you the 10% when it does. And if you do it then, you'll win a tournament.
Dude, I'm telling you, I walk into that Muskie Sunday meeting and I'm talking to you right now and I'm feeling like you're here. I don't know what to say. And people don't keep coming back because you're not telling them, what's benefiting them. So, I gotta let you go, but honestly, how much I love you. We're gonna be I think we're going to maybe lead up to that show and do some ice fishing stuff. So hold on to some good ice fishing pictures and some thoughts. I think you just wrote a big article for ice fishing for Ontario Tourism. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually every 2 weeks I put one up for Ontario Tourism, and throughout the winter, 3 times a month for Outdoor Canada magazine online. So it's called On the Water Online, and then of course the magazines both in Fish, Outdoor Canada, and Big Jim's Just Fishing. In the winter, 100% ice fishing tips.
Yeah, he's a good guy too. So we're looking forward to. We're gonna have Jim on shortly too, so we'll be talking to Big Jim as well. So, and he's been part of our show since the day I took it over, right? So it's like, it's almost 20 years now that we've been running the spring fishing show, and anyways, I miss it. I miss seeing you guys. I miss the after stuff. I miss the during stuff, the morning stuff before, the Angler Hall of Fame. That's what we do have another. We'll be announcing that on Friday. You're an Angler Hall of Famer. You don't just get that. That's something that you've been voted on by the alumni of it. So that'll be. I think it's Friday morning when they're doing that, and I guess CSIA and everybody will be there for that. Virtual meeting, I guess to say it, but normally that's a huge breakfast. It's a good time, everybody gets to strut their little strut, and honestly, dude, you actually bring credibility to that as well. And everybody, you look at all the names that are part of the Angler Hall of Fame. I don't think there's anybody there that doesn't bring credibility to it, right? And that's what it's all about. It's not an easy process because it's you have to you as an alumni and nominate them, but then there is you have to kind of tell a whole story about who the guy is, where he came from, and then it goes into everybody gets that information, everybody gets to read on it, and then it's voted on. So everybody who comes in has that kind of your kind of credibility, right? So it's all good, right?
It's all good.
All right, my friend. Thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate your time, and we'll be talking to you in probably next couple of weeks about the Ultimate Ice Fishing Show, and we'll be doing more of that. Maybe we'll do a show one night just strictly on ice fishing.
Yeah, anytime, Andy.
All right, buddy. Thank you very much.
Love you, brother.
Love you too, man. I'll tell you, that is, Gord Pyzer. I don't know how to say it. Everybody, and if you ever watch any shows wherever he's affiliated, whether it's a Fishing Canada show or even with the Zoom, everybody relates to him as the doctor, and he really is when it comes to the sport, because if you just listen to how thorough he is with everything he does, it's incredible. Now, Bob Izumi, you might have to have that dictionary so you know some of the words he says. But I'll tell you right now, I'm agreeing with Bob. He's he's an incredible person. Gord Pyzer is one of those people that he tells you stuff, and it seems like it has the science behind it. So it's not just hey, this is what it is. And I guess working with the MNR and doing all the work he's done, growing up over the years, he takes all that in consideration before he tells you what's going on and what's happening. And his word to me is gold. It really is, and it always will be. I totally respect the man. So I'll tell you right now, Gord, I can't wait to be working with you, and I'm happy we're doing something in November, so we'll see you before next year's spring fishing show. So once again, thank you for coming on, and for all the folks that tuned in, stay tuned because there's so many more speakers coming your way, and we want to thank everybody for getting up and close and personal for it with us. Thank you.
Outdoor Canada. Don't miss a single issue of Canada's only national hunting and fishing magazine. Subscribe to Outdoor Canada today.